Questions without notice, and I give the call to the honourable member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. The Code of Conduct for Ministers was published online on the 8th of July 2022. Had the Minister taken any action to comply with the Prime Minister's Code before the media reported on her breach almost 2 months later?
Give the call to the Minister.
Thank you, and I thank you for your question. I don't shy away from these issues at any stage. As I said yesterday and the day before, I initially transferred shares to my husband. When I found that that wasn't an appropriate divestment, I made all steps possible to transfer those shares. That is now done. At no stage was there a conflict of interest present. I take my disclosure requirements very seriously, which is why I disclose them, a lesson that perhaps those opposite could learn.
Order. The member for Page. I give the call to the member for Chisholm.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How will the government's cheaper medicines bill impact Australian families and help people with rising costs?
Great question. Call the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much to the member for her question. And indeed, today we've introduced legislation to provide for cheaper medicines in accordance with the commitment that we gave at the campaign launch at Optus Stadium there in Perth during the election campaign. We know that people are doing it really tough, and we know that household budgets are under pressure. We know they've suffered from rising prices, but also they've had a decade of deliberately low wages. So we're slashing the price of medicines by a third. For the first time in its 75-year history, the price of medicines on the PBS will go down next year. Labor created the PBS, now we're making the price of medicines cheaper. The maximum price will be $30, saving $12.50 per script. For a family that has 3 prescriptions, they'll save around $450 every year. This morning I met Greg Ryan, a single parent whose son has type 1 diabetes. Medicines are a big part of their family budget. This is what Greg had to say to me at the pharmacy there in Kingston this morning. He said, "Insulin is a non-negotiable cost for type 1 diabetes. You're never going to want to choose between whether I can afford this particular medication or can I afford something else. Insulin is non-negotiable. Any help to reduce the cost of it is greatly appreciated. It's going to make it easier for lots of families like myself." And it was indeed very good to be with him and with Trent, the head of the pharmaceutical body here in Australia. And we've worked closely with pharmacies in delivering this policy, because we know in particular that Australians, if they needed any reminder, were given a huge reminder during the COVID pandemic, which of course is ongoing, when pharmacists kept serving people, kept providing those services, kept their relationship up with their GPs. Pharmacists are the centres of our local community, and we are taking action to provide lasting cost of living relief in medicines. Next week we'll have our childcare legislation, which is also very important in lowering costs for families. Bringing people together, of course, as we did last week, to lift wages and boost productivity, bringing employers, unions and the civil society together as well. We want to make sure that we bring people up in terms of their economic security so they can live the lives that they aspire to.
I give the call to the member for Barara.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's again to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. Since she's become a minister, for how many days did either she or her husband hold shares in breach of the Prime Minister's Ministerial Code of Conduct?
Give a call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local. Order. Give the call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, and I refer to my previous answer and my answer yesterday and the day before. As soon as I became aware, I took steps to transfer those shares. At no point was there a conflict of interest. At no point have I presided over anything that required further disclosure than what I already made. Now that those shares are sold, I consider the matter closed, and so does the Prime Minister.
Order. The member for Lyons. Give the call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to make medicines cheaper for millions of Australians?
I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Spence for his question. A terrific new advocate for the northern suburbs of the great city of Adelaide, arguing for better health care, making it easier to see a doctor, and cheaper medicines, which increasingly have become unaffordable in this country.
Member for Barker.
Because, Mr Speaker, this morning, as the Prime Minister has said, we introduced legislation to implement one of our key election commitments, to slash the price of medicines for millions of Australians and improve their health at the same time. For the first time in the 75-year history of the PBS, the price of medicines will actually fall by almost 1/3 for general patients. From the 1st of January, the maximum cost for PBS medicines will fall from $42.50 a script down to just $30, delivering savings immediately to more than 3.5 million Australians. For a patient filling 2 scripts a month, that's a saving of $300 a year. For a family with 3 or 4 scripts a month, a saving of maybe $450 or even $600 a year. Now, as the Prime Minister said, this morning we met Greg, a terrific fellow who told us about his family experiences down at the Capital Chemist down the hill in Kingston, a terrific pharmacy run by Sandra, where I must say the Prime Minister and I were able to stock up on some of the vitamins and the supplements that middle-aged men like us need to get going every day. But Greg told us...
Order.
The Leader of the Opposition's pretending he doesn't need them, just gets by on good charm.
Order. The Minister will take a break. The Leader of the Opposition.
Just wanted to give our support to hear more detail of what the Minister is speaking about, what colour those tablets are, the frequency with which he needs to take them. We're happy to hear the detail.
I will ask the Minister to return to the question.
I'm happy to have a private meeting with the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. But seriously, Mr Speaker, Greg told us about the cost to his household budget of buying the medicines that literally keep his son alive, and of the relief that this measure will provide to his household budget that experiences the cost of living pressure that Australian households right across the country are experiencing right now. But, Mr Speaker, this is not just an important cost of living measure, it's also good for public health, because the ABS tells us that every year almost 1 million Australians go without a script that their doctor has said is important for their health because they simply can't afford it. Pharmacists tell us of patients coming to them asking for advice about which scripts they really need to fill and which they can go without. These are terrible choices, Mr Speaker, that no Australian should have to make. And if this bill passes, delivering the biggest cut to the price of medicines in Australia's history, then we can help ensure that no Australian has to go without the medicines that they need.
Before I call the member for Mayo, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is the Honourable Kate Word, Minister for Police, Fire and Emergency Services in the Legislative Assembly of the Northern Territory. And also we have the Council of Capital City Lord Mayors and the mighty mayors from the South East Queensland Council of Mayors. We extend a very warm welcome to you all. I give the call to the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Since June, my office has received 48 urgent inquiries from anxious constituents waiting for their passports to be processed. Some have waited several months. The government announced the recruitment of an extra 250 staff in June. How many have been recruited, and when will the 6-week processing time advised by the department's website be met? Thank you.
I call the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister representing the Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Can I thank the member for that very important question? and I will come back to the Minister with the precise answer to, or the member I should say, with the precise answer to the number of those who have been recruited and when we can expect that 6-week duration to be put in place. But I would point out that the lack of support that was provided by the former government in relation to this area over the preceding 9 years has led to the situation that is now facing
Members
so many
left.
Australians.
A million visas waiting.
Members on my left. Member for Hume.
That it has led to the situation that so many Australians are facing right now. And it's not surprising to me that you have had the incoming inquiries to your office about this question, because such inquiries have been felt by all of those on this side of the House, and I suspect in the electorate offices of those opposite, because what occurred under the former government in relation to this was an absolute disgrace. Now, the Albanese government is completely committed to rectifying this.
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Barker, I'm trying to hear the Manager of Opposition Business. Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, there was nothing in the question about the record of the previous government. On relevance, you should direct him to the terms of the question.
Thank you. The question was about the timelines and when it will be met, and I asked the Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, to return to the question.
With respect to those opposite, the record of the former government is precisely what has given rise to the fact of the inquiries which were referred to in the question that was asked by the honourable member to me. Now, the Albanese government is completely committed to rectifying the problems which have been given rise to by the performance of the former government. We will be doing everything we can to get to that, and I will return to the honourable member with the details that she's requested.
I give a call to the member for Patterson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What are the implications of today's national accounts? And how does the Albanese Labor government's economic plan respond to the challenges facing our government and economy?
I give the call to the Treasurer, who will be heard in silence.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Thanks to the member for Patterson, who I know will want me to also recognise the Beyond the Broncos mentoring program friends who've joined us in the gallery today. It's nice to see you here. Mr Speaker, today the national accounts for June were released, and what they showed were that our economy is growing relatively solidly, but some of the challenges in the economy are growing solidly as well. We have an economy which is growing at 0.9% in the June quarter and 3.6% over the year. And this, as I said, is solid growth, but it doesn't tell the full story of our economy, and it doesn't reflect some of the substantial volatility we've seen in our economy over the last couple of months since this data was recorded. The big drivers of growth in the quarter were consumption and net exports. Again, pretty solid story on both of those fronts, but some challenges when it came to investment in dwelling and engineering construction, and also a lot of evidence of the skills shortages and labour shortages and supply chain pressures in our economy, which are holding the economy back. And also more evidence at a time when we do have record profits that real wages are falling, as they have been for some time, and that is a fact from the data that this parliament cannot ignore. So what we want to see, Mr Speaker, and what our economic plan is all about is largely three things. First of all, providing responsible cost of living relief where we can, where it also provides an economic dividend. Childcare eases the cost of living but provides an economic dividend. Easing the cost of medicine makes life easier for people who are getting lots of scripts but delivers a health benefit as well. Fee-free TAFE is obviously part of the story. Tax cuts for electric vehicles, getting wages moving again. That's how you provide responsible cost of living relief. Secondly, we need to deal with the issues in our supply chains which are pushing up inflation and forcing the Independent Reserve Bank to raise rates. And that's why we're investing in these skills and labour shortages. That's why we're investing in TAFE It's why we're investing in cleaner and cheaper energy right across the board, a future made in Australia. And thirdly, we need to begin to deal with the legacy of rorts and waste and wasteful spending that we've seen in the budget for too long, the defining feature of the budget under those opposite for far too long. So whether it's responsible cost of living relief, dealing with issues in supply chains, or making sure that Australians get genuine value for money in their budget, these are the key concerns of this government, key components of an economic plan, key parts of the Jobs and Skills Summit last week, and they'll be the key components of the budget that I hand down from this dispatch box next month as well.
Order. I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, before the election, you looked the Australian public in the eye and promised on 97 occasions that you would reduce their power bills by $275. Yesterday, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy said, and I quote, "The statement of $275 by 2025, we stand by our commitment." End of quote. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the Labor Party has now recommitted without qualification to a $275 power bill price cut?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. I've said absolutely consistently from this dispatch box, I think on every single day that I've stood here, that we stand by the modelling that we did, the Reputex modelling. And the modelling, what it showed was that our plan that includes rewiring the nation, making sure that if you make the grid 21st century ready, if you actually enable renewables to fit into the energy grid through the integrated systems plan that's been developed by the Australian Energy Market Operator, then what you will do is promote investment in renewables, which is the cheapest form of energy. The cheapest form of energy. And our modelling showed very clear what the impact of that would be, both on households, but it also showed about the modelling of what it would do for businesses as well. This is not a complex question. That is why the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Australian Industry Group, the National Farmers Federation, the Clean Energy Council, the Australian Conservation Foundation, Greenpeace, the Investors Group when it comes to energy, all of these groups, all of these disparate groups have all been united in supporting the position that we took to the election. And the reason why business supports our plan is because it will result in lower prices. Because if you have a shift in the energy mix towards cheaper energy as opposed to more expensive energy, then you lower energy prices. But what those opposite want to do is they, after 22 failed plans, they want to go towards nuclear energy. That's what they want to do.
Order.
That's what they want to do. And they can say, if you like, where the plants are going to be. I look forward to their review, letting us know where the nuclear power plants are going to be, because we know that they've got to be in urban areas and we know that they've got to be near water.
Order. I give the call to the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Workplace Relations. How will the Albanese Labor government build on the outcomes of the Jobs and Skills Summit to encourage agreements and to get wages moving again?
I give the call to the Minister.
Thanks very much, and I thank the member for Solomon for the question, because cost of living and the challenges being faced by cost of living is the interaction between prices and wages. And part of being able to deal with cost of living means that we need to get wages moving. And that needs to apply to workers, in particular those who have not had the benefits of bargaining in a significant way. And disproportionately, they are the workforces where they are disproportionately women. Aged care, independent education sector, early childhood education, community services, health services.
Will stop yelling.
I had only today land on my desk, and this is how much red tape is in the system at the moment when businesses want to bargain together. Today lands on my desk from 22 different employers employing dental hygienists, dental therapists and health therapists needing my permission to be allowed to bargain together. So the workers want to bargain with these employers, the 22 employers want to bargain together, and yet we have a red tape system where it has to go all the way to the minister, where I have to take into account 6 different conditions, and there's actually a 7th condition, which is anything else you want to consider. And after I give permission for it, which I did today, it then has to go to the Fair Work Commission for them to give permission as well. Those opposite will publicly rail against red tape, unless it's red tape that holds wages back. In Victoria, we had early education centres. We had 70 not-for-profit early childhood centres that wanted to be able to bargain together, but the current system didn't allow them. Now, these are all workplaces with about 20 to 30 staff, overwhelmingly female workplaces, and not one of them with its own HR department. Like those opposite who wanted to do the bullying of different small business organisations recently, saying, how dare you try to get rid of red tape and try to be able to bargain together, might take notice that small businesses don't have their own HR department. If they want to be able to have an agreement that is tailor-made for their style of business, multi-employer bargaining is the only way they're going to have that sort of opportunity. And yet in that case, every one of those centres had to individually, all 70 of them, had to individually go through the process of registering an agreement, making their own applications. But what was the outcome? You were able to get 16% above the award for those workers and for the employers to be able to get the sorts of agreements they want. If we can get those sorts of outcomes without the red tape, it gets wages moving and it's good for business.
Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In the last week, the government has re-announced changes to make medicines cheaper that the Coalition actually promised in April, celebrated a pension increase that occurred automatically due to skyrocketing inflation, and released a half-baked version of the Coalition's plan to allow pensioners to work more days, which expires in just 9 months' time. With Australians facing a cost-of-living crisis now, why doesn't the Prime Minister have any new initiatives to provide cost-of-living relief before Christmas?
Order. Give the call. Order. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, I do thank the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party for that question. I do thank it. And I note the number of interviews that have been given by the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party where she has said, in response to the number of initiatives that the new government has taken, why didn't they do it 100 days ago? Why didn't they do it 100 days ago? Why didn't they do it 100 days ago? We've got to have something to amuse ourselves when Parliament's sitting and we're not in here. We've got to have something to amuse ourselves. So, if only the Deputy Leader of the Opposition had been in a position to do something at one stage. If only in April, that the Deputy Leader of the Opposition refers to, she was in a position to do something. Or maybe in 2021 or 2000 or 2019 or 2018 or any of the other times that the member was sitting in the Cabinet, in between, of course, that sabbatical that she took from being in the Cabinet. But what we have done, what we did, of course, in the election campaign was go to Perth in our election campaign, and we announced a decrease from $42.50 to $30 for pharmaceuticals on the PBS. And what we did was we didn't just announce it, we did it. We did it. We did it. And we've introduced the legislation here today. We promised cheaper childcare, and that legislation will be here, of course, next week. Of course, the policy that they announced during the election campaign was less than what we announced, and was about 9 years too late. But I just find it beyond belief that there's no self-reflection at all in saying, why didn't you do things earlier, when you sat on these benches for 9 years and watched cost of living pressures rise at the same time as you were putting downward pressure on wages, at the same time as low wages were a key feature of the economic architecture. So the truth is that those on this side of the chamber now, the new government is acting based upon the commitments that we made. Those opposite
Order.
are lamenting the fact that they didn't do anything to alleviate cost of living pressures in their 9 long years in office.
Order. I give the call to the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And my speaker is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to ensure Australians have more choice and better access to electric vehicles? And why is policy change in this area so important?
I call the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
You've got to wait for it, guys. You've got to wait for it. Just wait for it. Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question and her very strong interest in energy policy. And of course, in the Albanese government, we're getting on with the job of providing Australians with better choice of electric vehicles and cheaper electric vehicles. Important is our electric vehicle tax cut that the Treasurer is shepherding through the Parliament. That will save a fleet buyer $9,000 a year on average for their employees. If they buy them an electric vehicle, it'll save an individual $5,000 a year on average if they lease their electric vehicle through their employer. But I was a little surprised to read this morning, Mr Speaker, that the party of tax cuts is against this tax cut. The party of tax cuts over here has decided they're opposing making electric vehicles cheaper. This came as a considerable surprise to the government. It just shows they will go to any lengths to stop Australians getting cheaper and better electric vehicles. But even better, when I read this article this morning, was the explanation. The Shadow Minister for Finance said, we've looked at this and the real issue and concern is actually supply. The problem is supply, they said. The trouble is they're against even discussing policies to improve supply for electric vehicles to Australia. A couple of weeks ago, I announced that the government, Minister King and I, the Minister for Transport and I, announced the government would issue a discussion paper about how we can improve supply of electric vehicles to Australia. Opposition against it, against discussing better supply. They know, the Leader of the Opposition knows, that Australia and Russia are the only 2 developed countries without fuel efficiency standards, and he says, "Niet, we're not going to discuss that." It's his net zero policy, Mr Speaker. It's the only one he's got. He's against it. But the Deputy Leader of the Opposition came out. She had a good reason. She said, another one of those interviews, she said, there is no firm in the world that's making electric utes at the moment. No company in the world. Now, she has a point. I'm always fair, Mr Speaker. She has a point. But there are some small boutique firms making electric utes. Honourable members might not have heard of them. Mitsubishi, Ford and General Motors. But apart from that, there's very few, Mr Speaker. It's only a small group are making electric vehicles.
Order.
We on this side of the House stand for better choice because electric vehicles are better for the environment, they're better for cost of living, and we want all Australians, regardless of where they live, to have the right to a good electric vehicle, and that's what we're getting on and delivering.
Now I give the call. Stand up. I give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister refused to rule out increasing taxes on Australian families. With Australians facing 5 consecutive increases in interest rates, will the Prime Minister rule out any new or higher taxes on Australian families, businesses or retirees by Christmas?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, it pays to pay attention to what happens in question time, because I thank the member for Hume for his question. I say to the member for Hume that at 2:30 you shouldn't necessarily ask the question that was decided upon whenever tactics met this morning, because we just had in this chamber an answer about taxation. and we on this side of the House have legislation,
Members on my left.
before the Parliament right now to lower taxation. And those opposite in their party room yesterday, imagine the discussion. Some of them would have said, followed the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party and said, well, it's not really relevant because they don't exist, these electric vehicles, electric utes, they don't exist. But others had said, no, we have to hold the line here, we have to try to, we've blown out $1 trillion of debt. Why would we worry about these issues? And then they came down to, no, remember if we vote for a tax reduction.
Pause. I call the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Point of order is relevant. He was asked, will he rule out taxes on Australian families, businesses and retirees? That's not an invitation to speculate about what occurred in the opposition party.
The question was also about cost of living crisis and impacts on businesses and retirees being higher. So I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
No, I'm completely addressing taxes, Mr Speaker, because we're on this side. What we've done is we've got legislation to lower taxes for individuals, but to lower taxes as well for businesses by changing the FBT provisions which are there. But those opposite have made a decision to support higher taxes, And it's not surprising, given they were all over the shop. They probably came down at the end, probably the end key killer point raised by one of those opposite, perhaps the member for Hume, was we can't do this because, remember, if more people have electric vehicles, we'll end the weekend. Remember that? We'll end the weekend. And no one wants to do that. Because that is the former government's position and quite clearly what the current opposition's position is as well. What they need to do is to recognise the fact that there has been a change. This is a government that's about efficiency, that's about delivering for Australian families, that's about delivering for Australian workers, that's about shaping the future, not being shaped by it.
Give the call to the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How will the Albanese Labor government's electric car discount benefit Australians, and what are the risks to these benefits being realised?
I call the Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the member for his important question. Look, we are really excited about our policy on electric vehicles. It's been a pleasure to work closely with the Minister for Climate Change because we're proud to be delivering something which will make electric cars cheaper in this country. We've got an electric car discount which does two things. First of all, remove the tariff, and secondly, provide a fringe benefits tax exemption for eligible cars made available by employers for employees. And the legislation before the House right now seeks to achieve the second part of this policy. And what it will do is it will cut the cost to employers of providing electric cars for people to use. It will cut the cost for workers for entering into these arrangements, and it will help to grow the market for affordable electric cars in Australia. For a model valued at about $50,000, it means a $9,000 benefit to an employer and $4,700 benefit to an employee. And I want to thank members of the crossbench who have been engaging with myself and the Minister, not because we've got an identical view on every aspect of the policy, but because we share the broader objectives on this policy. And the question for this House, Mr Speaker, is who could possibly oppose a tax cut to make electric vehicles cheaper for businesses and for workers in a way that increases the stock of electric vehicles in our country? And the answer is obvious. It is disappointing, but not especially surprising to learn that the geniuses opposite assembled in their party room yesterday and decided, after spending years and years talking about how taxes should be lower, and they agreed in their party room that they would oppose a tax cut for electric vehicles. And it says something about the bubble of bumbling incompetence that the Shadow Treasurer floats around in, that he has the nerve to ask a question of the Prime Minister immediately after the Minister explained that we are trying to get a tax cut through this parliament.
Now, this is the Captain Clunker approach to electric vehicle policy, Mr Speaker. It's to pretend that they love lower taxes until they're asked to actually vote for it. They pretend they like lower taxes until it interferes and collides with their outdated, obsolete, out-of-touch ideology. There is no reason to oppose this legislation except that they physically cannot bring themselves to support a good idea. And this is what we see from the leader of the leftovers over here, a pretty clear pattern. He boycotted the Job Summit, and now he's boycotting the future. They aren't the Liberal Party anymore, they're the Luddite Party. They have a leader which is dead set on division, defined by his denial, his division and his destruction, fronting the dregs of a departed government that the Australian people ditched for a reason.
Order. Order. Before I give the call to the member for Curtin, I'll ask for silence in the House and give the call to the member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The government recently approved the release of 10 new fossil fuel exploration sites, demonstrating that it's willing to continue developing fossil fuel projects into the future. This is incompatible with Australia reaching its 43% emissions reduction target and incompatible with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. If new oil and gas projects are to be developed, which sectors will be expected to cut their emissions more deeply to make room in our carbon budget for these projects?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question. As I have before, thank her for her engagement on these issues in a very constructive way. And as the honourable member knows, our climate change bill should, if all goes well, pass the Senate tomorrow and become the Climate Change Act of Australia, and will enshrine that 43% emissions reduction in the law of the land, which sensible honourable members agree is a very good thing, because it provides that certainty and that signal to the rest of the world. Now, as the honourable member also knows, 43% is an economy-wide target to be achieved by the whole country. But we do have policies that achieve that on a sector-by-sector basis. Rewiring the nation when it comes to electricity, electric vehicle strategy when it comes to transport, and safeguards mechanism when it comes to big emitters, particularly oil and gas. And safeguards mechanism is an important way for oil and gas emissions to be reduced. And we have a discussion paper out there at the moment, and all honourable members are encouraged to make a constructive suggestion, if you have any. And I know honourable members of the crossbench may well do that, because it is a sensible project, a process to go through, including how new proposals are dealt with in the safeguards mechanism, and we are open to constructive advice. The Minister for Resources did a couple of weeks ago release for exploration an invitation to explore those areas. It's an annual process which occurs every year. The Minister for Resources has done that in an appropriate way.
Give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Local Government. How did the Albanese Labor government take the views of local government into account at the Jobs and Skills Summit?
The call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, and I thank the member for her question, a former mayor of Surf Coast Shire and a strong advocate for local government in this place. The Jobs and Skills Summit provided me with an additional opportunity to engage the sector, which is a very important voice, and their views were loud and clear. They are the closest level of government to the people. They reach into every town and village across this country. I know firsthand that over the last 9 years, local government felt like its voice was not heard by those opposite. It took an Albanese Labor government to prioritise and respect the sector.
Members on my left.
As a former mayor, I have a unique understanding of the connection that local government has to its community, and they bring the voice of community to government. They also employ over 190,000 people across 400 different occupations. In the lead up to the summit, I hosted a number of local government roundtables and met with representatives from local government, state and territory associations and local government professionals. A key theme that I heard was the lack of training opportunities and course offerings. For example, in South Australia, there is no longer a tertiary course for planning. This will lead to the sector suffering wide-ranging shortages of a number of professions: town planners, engineers, building surveyors and project managers in particular. That was loud and clear in the Job Summit as well. And one of the outcomes that we are particularly pleased with is the 180,000 fee-free TAFE places that are going to be offered across the country. Local governments have been very good at being innovative and agile when it comes to meeting the expectations of their communities. And when the Prime Minister announced that he was bringing back that local government voice to National Cabinet, it was well received and I was incredibly proud. Proud because collaboration between all levels of government is critical in delivering for our communities. And what I heard during my roundtables is that there is a renewed sense of collaboration and partnership. Indeed, I am incredibly proud to be delivering back the Australian Council of Local Governments, first introduced by the Prime Minister. I'm excited about the future of collaboration and partnership with local governments, a sector that delivers for all of our communities.
Give the call to the member for Flynn.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. How many Indonesians have now been trained to protect Australia from the dangerous cattle disease lumpy skin, as promised by the government on the 9th of August?
Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry.
Thank you very much for your question and for raising, I think it's the first time we've been actually asked a question about lumpy skin disease, which of course is another biosecurity threat to our agricultural sector. I am pleased, as I know that the other members of this House will be, that we remain LSD-free, and long may that stay the way, because an outbreak of lumpy skin disease or foot and mouth disease in Australia would have a devastating impact on our economy. I know the government, the minister, is supporting Australia's livestock industry and responding in a calm and methodical way. We've been doing that both with our foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease, and all the way along we'll be continuing to make sure that our biosecurity is strengthened. We're taking, again, a three-pronged approach to these, strengthening measures at the border, working with our partners in the region, particularly Indonesia, but beyond, to prevent the spread of these diseases and to make sure that we've got doses of vaccine. Some 435,000 doses of LSD vaccine have been delivered to Indonesia, and we continue to provide technical support to that country.
Give the call to the member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Sport. How is the Albanese Labor government working to promote women's participation in all aspects of sport, on and off the field?
Give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Dunkley for their question. The first ever female president of Squash and Racquetball Victoria, who has been decorated for her contribution to increasing women's participation in sport. And can I also acknowledge the other female athletes that are elected to this place, the member for McKellar and the member for Warringah, whom I hope will join with the Albanese Labor government in bringing integrity and equality back to sport. We want to increase opportunities for women's participation in sport. We want to support elite female athletes, and we want to encourage more women to take up leadership positions in sport at all levels. Instead of continuing to try and retrofit women into a system built for men, we want to build a system now that acknowledges and accepts everybody in sport at all levels. Instead of continuing to try and retrofit women, we're going to start anew. We are going to close the gender pay gap. The Albanese government stands for closing the gender pay gap, whether you work at a desk, in a factory or in an arena, and we want to address that for female athletes and female administrators who are leading in Australia. I chaired the Women in Sport Roundtable Workforce Edition, facilitated by the Sexual Discrimination Commissioner Kate Jenkins, to fit in with the broader Jobs and Skills Summit held recently here at Parliament. Repeatedly raised with me at this roundtable was how the infrastructure of sport is still heavily geared towards men, both on and off the field. And that is unacceptable, Mr Speaker, for those on this side of the House, and particularly as we are now on the green and gold runway to Brisbane 2032, an event I know that you, Mr Speaker, feel very passionately about. There are too many one-off programs rather than long-lasting systemic reforms in sport. There are too many times when women are punished for daring to excel in sport. Opal star and GOAT Lauren Jackson joined our workforce roundtable, and she spoke passionately about how many awful slurs had been directed at her, her teammates, junior players that she helps and female referees, not just during her career but to this day. We must do more to protect them, and we will. We will do more to create sporting infrastructure that treats women with equality. Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister and Treasurer leading a national debate on employment and the workforce provides us with an important opportunity to correct sports gender imbalance as well, and that is now what we are seeking to do. Women bring a diversity of skills and experience but continue to be underrepresented in decision-making in sport, and that is now what we on this side of the House are working to change.
Give the call to the member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Ahead of the anti-corruption legislation being introduced next week, will the government also establish an independent whistleblower protection commissioner as a one-stop shop to support and protect the brave people who will report corruption to the Anti-Corruption Commission and across the entire public sector?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
I thank the member for Indi for her question, and thank you. I thank the member for Indi for her question, and say that I'm looking forward.
Order.
I've never seen you helpful before, Phil. And say that I'm looking forward to introducing to the Parliament next week the legislation to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission, fulfilling a commitment that our government made at the last election and indeed at the election before that, and just to remind those opposite a commitment that those opposite made at the last election and at the election before that. And it's long past time that this Parliament moved to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission. Going to the question from the member for Indi, the government is of course committed to ensuring that Australia has an effective framework to protect whistleblowers. Frameworks to protect whistleblowers are critical to supporting integrity, to supporting the rule of law. I'm very proud that when we were last in government, we brought to this Parliament the Public Interest Disclosure Act 2013, and I equally am able to say that I was very disappointed to watch that the statutory inquiry that we legislated for when passing that Act in 2013 took place and was carried out by an eminent Australian, Mr Philip Moss, who reported to the former government at the end of 2016, and there the report sat. Mr Moss made a number of very sensible suggestions for amendment to the Public Interest Disclosure Act. Regrettably, the former government simply sat on those recommendations by Philip Moss. I have said since coming to office that we have picked up Mr Moss's report. We are going to be looking hard at the recommendations that he has made. I am hopeful of bringing to the Parliament in coming months amendments to the Public Interest Disclosure Act which pick up and almost certainly will need to update the recommendations that Mr Moss made back in 2016. Whether or not it goes to a Whistleblower Protection Commissioner is something that the government is still considering. I know that the member for Indi has a very keen interest in this matter. I know that in her Anti-Corruption Commission bill that she had in the last Parliament, she had provided for a Whistleblower Protection Commissioner. That's why we are taking that particular idea very seriously indeed.
The call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Minister, how will the outcomes of the Job and Skills Summit deliver proper jobs and wages for Indigenous Australians in remote communities?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Lingiari for her question and recognise that she has a very deep interest in this issue and an intimate understanding of a community development program. Thank you very much. The Albanese Labor government believes that the CDP is broken. It has been broken for a very long time. Communities tell us it is broken. It does not result in employment. It does not result in people participating properly in the scheme, and the scheme needs rebuilding. It needs replacing, in fact, and that's precisely what we intend to do. There are 40,000 people in 1,000 communities who are on the Community Development Program, and 85% of that 40,000 people are First Nations people. It is a program that is not fit for purpose and has caused real hurt and real harm in communities, and it has certainly not ended up with people getting employment. We believe the CDP should be replaced, and that's what we're moving to do. It should be a scheme that is about real wages, decent conditions and real jobs, and that is what the outcome will be. Just last week, I held a roundtable into the lead-up to the Skills Summit to address these issues directly. There were representatives from peak bodies, alliances and unions, community leaders, local councils, and all had an opportunity to have a frank conversation about this failed scheme. Mr Mickey Wanamara from Arnhem Land Progress Association warmly welcomed our approach, describing it like this. And this is a person that knows this scheme very, very well. It is a way to build sustainability and a better future for our people. We'll be holding more targeted consultations, and in fact that is being planned as we speak, because we know that the previous government did not listen to people who knew this program well. We believe in self-determination, and that's what we will put in place. And most importantly, we have freed up providers by 25% of their current funding to try new things, to trust them, to be able to do new things in community, to deliver real jobs, proper wages and decent conditions.
Yeah. Give the call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Does the departure of the former Chief Executive of Snowy Hydro indicate that the Minister is unwilling to accept frank and fearless technical advice as to the viability of the Kurri Kurri plant operating with hydrogen from day one?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
No.
Give the call to the order. The member for Hume. Order. I give the call to the member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government ensuring our defence personnel have the skills and training to operate our future naval capabilities and defend Australia's economic and security interests?
The call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, can I thank the member for Wills for his question and acknowledge the contribution that he's made in this place and indeed in his pre-parliamentary life to our nation's security. Last week I was in the United Kingdom and was present at the commissioning of HMS Anson, an astute-class submarine in the Royal Navy at BAE's facility at Barrow-in-Furness. And I had the opportunity of being shown around that facility and presented with the way in which BAE build both the Dreadnought and Astute-class submarines, and it really was a sight to see. I met with my counterpart, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, and the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and we talked about the very solid progress which is happening in respect of AUKUS. And this builds on a visit back in July to the United States, where I met with Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin, where we also spoke about the progress of AUKUS. And across all three countries there is a sense of shared mission which has us on track to making a decision in the first part of next year about which platform will be the basis of Australia's nuclear-powered future submarine. But as important as the physical submarine is, there is a human dimension to this challenge. We need to be growing a submariner cohort who are able to operate this submarine from the first day that it enters the water. And I spoke with Ben Wallace about providing the opportunity for Australian submariners in the very early part of the life of HMS Anson to be a part of that submarine's crew. And this is in addition to opportunities that we're pursuing in the United States, where I met with 2 Australian students who are participating in the US Reactor Engineering School, and they're in Washington. And as we build this defence, the submariner cohort, it's being reflected also in those opportunities that we're providing to those who will be building our submarines and our surface fleet. Indeed, I met with a couple of Australians who right now in Govan, in Glasgow, are building HMS Glasgow, the first of the Type 26 frigates in the Royal Navy, which is the reference class of ship for the Hunter class, which is the future frigates that we will be building. And they're part of a group of 80 Australians who have participated in building HMS Glasgow and will be coming back to Australia in the coming years ahead to build HMAS Hunter. This is inspiring to speak to these young Australians, and be it operating our submarines or building our ships, all of these Australians are making a huge contribution to our nation's security.
On indulgence, I give the call to the member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to associate the coalition with the Minister for Defence's comments on AUKUS. It was the former coalition government who struck AUKUS in September of last year, the biggest defence and foreign policy achievement since ANZUS 70 years ago, and we want to see AUKUS realised as quickly as possible. In fact, our strategic circumstances require exceptional leadership from the Minister for Defence, and we're going to be holding him to account to make sure.
No, resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. We're moving to the next question. That is not how indulgence works, member for Canning, and it's a lesson. Order. If you wish to take indulgence, you need to make it clear and concise, not stray into partisan politics. I give the call to the member for Bowman.
My question is to the Prime Minister. According to the latest ABS data, the average Australian mortgage is just over $600,000. A homeowner with this mortgage is now paying more than $760 more a month. When the Prime Minister said yesterday the impact of interest rate rises was just $95 to $145, was the Prime Minister misleading the House, not across the detail, or trying to downplay the cost of living crisis Australians are facing?
Order. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Bowman for his question. What I said yesterday was the average mortgage, the average mortgage outstanding balance is $330,000. A 50 basis point increase adds up to $409 as a result.
Give the call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for International Development and the Pacific. How is the Australian government building a more prosperous region and supporting Australian businesses through improvements to the Pacific labour mobility?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence Industry.
I want to thank the member for Bendigo for her question and thank her for working with local employers to access the scheme, and also, importantly, to welcome all those Pacific workers that are right now in Bendigo contributing to the local economy. Mr Speaker, the Albanese Labor government is deeply committed to a stronger economy and deepening our relationship with the Pacific. And the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme, or PALM, is critical to that. It was created by Labor in 2012 through this SWP, and we're improving it now that we're in government again. We're improving it by reducing the travel costs for employers utilising the scheme. We're improving it by allowing workers on long-term visas to bring their families. We're improving it by increasing protections against worker exploitation. And we're improving it by expanding the number of sectors that can access the scheme. And I'm proud to inform the House that this is already paying off. We've got a record number of Pacific workers in the economy, over 27,000 already, and nearly 400 employers are accessing the scheme. This is critical to filling our labour shortages while we train Australians right now. And, Mr Speaker, it's making a huge difference in the Pacific. 1/3 of the 15 million Pacific Islanders live on less than $20 Australian a week, less than $20 a week. In contrast, the average worker in this scheme on a long-term visa sends back $15,000 a year. Imagine the impact for families and communities. $15,000 going back to their community, to their family each year. And, Mr Speaker, I've had the privilege of seeing the impact of this scheme firsthand. I recently visited the Solomon Islands and met Joseph and Jared, who returned from 3 years in Australia. And not only did they benefit from this scheme, they developed critical skills that are now allowing them to set up new businesses in the Solomon Islands. And I met people training to be meat workers and hospitality workers who are so excited about this scheme. I went, while I was in Suva with the Prime Minister, to visit a training centre where 40 enthusiastic women were training to be aged care workers in Australia. They're now in Australia doing their practical training in the lead-up to working in regional Queensland. And, Mr Speaker, I'm delighted to say there are 40,000 pre-screened workers ready to go. And we anticipate that each year this scheme will inject over $360 million into the economies of Pacific Islands. $360 million a year, which will be vital in some countries where remittances make up to 40% of their GDP. Mr Speaker, this is a vital scheme that helps the Australian economy, lifts families out of poverty and strengthens our relationship with the Pacific.
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. After 22 questions, the productivity dividend of this government is on show for all, and I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.